Today we're going to be learning about achieving goals in the student-led classroom, a capstone presentation by Jennifer Jasinski. In Chapter 1, an introduction, we're going to cover the following topics: the researcher's background, why goal setting in the student-led classroom, the gap, a problem that needs a change, and a question to research. Here's a little bit about my background as the researcher. I attended Eastern Illinois University and graduated in 2011 with a Bachelor's of Science in Education, as well as a certification in K through 9 with a middle school ELA endorsement. I spent 6 years teaching at Renaissance School in Racine, and I taught grades 1st, 2nd, 5th, as well as 5th and 6th ELA during my time there. I was also the health and safety officer. I currently am attending college at Wisconsin Lutheran College, seeking a master's in leadership innovation. And I also am currently working at W.C. Petty in Antioch and teaching 4th grade. So why goal setting in the student-led classroom? I really believe that the student-led classroom gives kids ownership and changes the game. It's a subject I feel very passionate about because students are not only taking charge of their learning, but they're also starting to understand what they're learning about. They're tracking and they're assessing and they're setting goals around their learning so that not only are they able to understand why it's important, but they're able to build upon that learning throughout the classroom and into the future. The student-led model does a great job of promoting a strong classroom culture. It creates independent, self-motivating learners. It encourages goal-oriented and future-focused learners. It also provides students and teachers with a purpose for learning that they can, again, carry with them into the future. Classrooms across America are facing a variety of problems. Currently, there are 3 problems that are emphasized within classrooms that promote a need to change that the student-led classroom model can help with and address. So the first one is an unchanging classroom model. The last 3 decades have been witness to an educational system that has struggled, has been unable to change, has been criticized and derided in some circles, and has been unable to be successful in the education of far too many children. That quote comes from Surgener, who talks about how the classroom looks exactly the same as it did in the 1950s as it does today. So many things have changed, like the Air Force doctors' offices. However, teachers' classrooms have pretty much the same desks and same look as they did 50 years ago. The second problem is the pressure placed on test scores. So there's been an inundated amount of pressure placed on test scores, and people are wanting to use the data and evidence not only to judge schools and teachers, but to push and drive learning. So that is another problem and burden that teachers are feeling, and also a lack of ownership and motivation. So this is a great solution because student-led teaching and learning is an innovative form of learning and teaching that empowers students with direct ownership of the learning experience. So this can kind of help combat those 3 components. The gap in research here is simple. The research in this area is limited, and therefore that leaves it lacking. While this topic is really a buzz topic, it has a lot of interest, and you can see components of it in classrooms and different classrooms in schools across America. There is a great deal of schools that are using it to inform data and also that want to implement the components. However, like Jimerson and Reams says, despite such evidence of popularity among practitioners, the research base is decidedly lacking. So it's a new topic that teachers are really excited about. It got implemented really quickly, but then on the backside, there hasn't been much research done to prove its effectiveness. A question to research. So my big question here is, how does a student-led classroom help students and teachers successfully set and achieve goals while allowing the student to take ownership of their own learning? And then I also created some sub-questions that I wanted to discover throughout my research, which were, what does the implementation of a student-led classroom look like in different classrooms? What role does the data binder play in achieving and setting goals? What are some different options and ways to track data goals across classrooms? And finally, how does the teacher know students are achieving those goals? This next slide contains key terminology that we'll be using throughout the rest of the presentation. So the data binder is a resource that the students use as a tool to track and set goals. The data wall is a focal point on the wall, usually like a bulletin board or space designated on the wall that they can put up charts and graphs to track their group goals and progress. The PDSA cycle stands for the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, and that is a change management cycle. First, you plan something, then you actually do it, you implement it, you study what you've done, and then you act if you need to make adjustments. The student-led conferences are just as it sounds, the conference where the student uses the data wall and the data binder to actually give the conference in place of the teacher, and they lead it with their parents using those tools. The student-led teaching model is just an innovative form of teaching that uses all the components of the classroom to give the kids more ownership. And then finally, quality tools are charts, graphs, and data points that can help serve as a tool that the students can use to understand and track their data. Chapter 2 is the literature review. In this chapter, we will cover the following topics: the introduction to the student-led classroom, student-led learning and goal setting, how Carol Dweck's mindset influenced the study, and how Robert Lockheed's goal-setting theory influenced the study, and finally, goals of the study. The student-led model provides students with the unique opportunity to take control of their learning as well as goals set within the classroom. This model is great because teachers are placed in a unique place that allows them to act as not only a coach but also a facilitator with the students. It gives them the ability to gradually release ownership over to the students as time progresses into the classroom. The student-led classroom is comprised of 7 components that include the classroom mission statement and class norms, the classroom meeting, the data wall, the data binder, quality tools, the student-led conference, and the PDSA cycle, or the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, which we will learn more about as we continue throughout the slides. The student-led model creates an environment that supports and empowers students in the process, both individually and through group goal setting. One way that the model really highlights individualized goal setting is through the student data binders. Jimerson and Reams spent a lot of time looking into data binders and folders as a place of student engagement where they are able to track and really navigate their own personal data. When it comes to being motivated to collect that data, student goal achievement can directly be tied to motivation, which can be difficult at times if kids don't initially buy in. So the area of motivation is one that needs to be looked into. As students become increasingly proficient and are given feedback, they can then generate their own descriptive feedback and start to set their own goals for what comes next in their journey. And then as they do, build the autonomy to set and achieve goals in the classroom with an emphasis on data, everything becomes cyclical and purposeful so that it can be used again in their future and then throughout their learning experience. The student-led classroom has 7 key components highlighted within the model. The first is the classroom mission statement and class norms that happen at the beginning of the school year. It's really important that children are involved in the process of making the class mission statement and the classroom norms because they will not only align themselves with those, but they will also have more ownership as they move into using other components of the model. The model allows for students to have both group and individualized goal setting. The first component, the data wall, allows them to have group setting. The data wall is a semi-public display that happens somewhere within the classroom and is centralized with group data that they can look at and interpret during the classroom meetings. The classroom meetings typically happen once a week, and students are able to discuss their feelings, assess the data, and come up with proactive goals moving forward. Then there's the individualized goal setting process, which happens through the data binders. And these are really portfolios of personalized learning. They can be both done either online or in an actual physical binder, where the student gets to look deeper into their more private data and set goals around things such as assessments. And then they can use quality tools and the PDSA model to do this. So quality tools and PDSA model are used both in tandem with the data wall and data binders. The quality tools can be anything such as charts, graphs, histograms. The PDSA model stands for the Plan, Do, Study, Act model, where kids are planning what they're going to be doing. They actually physically do it. Then they study the results, and then they call to action to change or continue with the plan they have in place based on the data. And then finally, all of these components are really culminated in the student-led conference, which can happen in both the fall and the spring, where students highlight all of their learning and the different things that they have been doing, utilizing mostly the data binder, but can also incorporate other components of the classroom, and they share that with anyone who then comes to those conferences for them. One person who really impacted the student-led model was Carol Dweck with her work on mindset. She discovered children who initially might have the same prior ability had two distinct goal orientations: a performance goal orientation and a learning goal orientation, which she then labeled fixed mindset and growth mindset. Having students learn the difference between fixed mindset and growth mindset can be a game changer in the student-led classroom. It can also help develop the earlier components of the student-led model and set the culture necessary for the classroom to succeed. So when looking at the growth mindset, it really is a great asset or tool to the student-led classroom because it helps enhance the student's outlook on setting things like the classroom mission statement up or the classroom norms, as well as setting and achieving their goals and remaining strong throughout the goal tracking and achieving process. Another person who really influenced the student-led classroom was Robert Lackey with his work on goal setting theory. His goal setting theory really lays the foundation to all the goal setting that happens within the student-led model. And so he talks about how proper implementation increases performance in a team or in an individual so that they can and are more likely to reach their goals. There's also a component highlight of self-set goals and how people with higher self-efficacy set higher goals than people with lower self-efficacy, which is why those early elements of the classroom mission statement and norms and the environment and group dynamic are so important within the model. And then finally, the summary feedback, that if students are not getting feedback and they don't know what they need to adjust or can't identify the problems in the performance, then they're not going to be able to make those adjustments. So making sure that summary feedback is given often and that the students can understand and utilize that feedback to set goals in the future so that eventually they can give themselves summary feedback by identifying the pitfalls on their own. This study aims to show how the student-led classroom uses Lackey's goal setting theory and Dweck's psychology of mindset to help students set, track, and achieve goals. Two components that I wish to share during this study are that students who have a growth mindset and are continuously looking at their data will be more inclined to notice trends and adjust them to meet their goals. Also, goals will not only help students to be more successful, but will also help them to track, monitor, and potentially boost social and academic performance. Chapter 3 covers all the methodology that happens throughout the research. The topics covered in Chapter 3 will be the journey to why, studying the group, the setup, and ethically sound. Okay. My research journey led me to look for an ideal fit for determining the importance of the student-led classrooms and why goal setting plays a big factor in the student-led model. The location that I chose was a K-5 school system in the Midwest that had 3 fourth grade classrooms with teachers in different levels of their career: a first year teacher, a 7th year teacher, and a 12th year teacher with different levels of varied experience and different durations of time spent working within the district. Currently, the school was already implementing a student-led model through an initiative called the Community Learning Continuum. However, not all teachers were implementing the model, and it was given choice by the teachers to participate or not in the model. The three fourth grade teachers had chosen to participate in the model and were at varied levels of implementation. This slide contains some group demographics for the school in which the research was conducted. Overall, the school has 415 students, the biggest percentage, which is 80% Caucasian, and the next biggest percentage being a tie between 12% Hispanic and two or more races. Also, they have about 15% of their students currently holding IEPs, and classrooms that differentiate between 20 to 25 students per class. This was a good depiction of the three rooms that I studied, which encompassed a total of 67 students altogether. The school was implementing the community learning continuum, which is a form of the student-led classroom, and they have results of the 30th percentile for reading, 40th percentile for math, 63rd percentile for science on their state assessments, with a growth rate of about 50% overall. In order to have a productive study, a research plan was set up and put in place, started with obtaining consent from the Instructional Review Board and the school and teachers itself. After consent was received, consent from the teachers and principal was received as well. There was an initial meeting set up to schedule observations and other things that would happen throughout the terms of research with each teacher. Observations happened weekly and daily within my own classroom. The data binder walkthrough contained the first original meeting with each teacher where they actually walked through the different components of their data binder so that I could see how each compared and contrasted amongst all the rooms. And the final setup was the action research, which was done within my own classroom, utilizing the different components, but mostly highlighting the data binder itself. Ethics played an important role in the entire research process and was in the forefront of all the research conducted. And to ensure this occurred, informed consent and board approval was obtained. Normal educational practice was deemed for the students, so letters did not need to go home, but was offered to the principal as an option. Names and identifiers were removed from the project. Data was not discussed between classrooms. Transparency was given to all teachers about data and observations, and teacher voice was obtained through the survey as well as through individual meetings. Chapter 4 covers the data analysis. The topics covered in Chapter 4 are 3 emerging themes: classroom culture, goal setting, and student ownership. 3 themes that really emerged from the student-led classroom were classroom culture, goal setting, and then student ownership. When it came to classroom culture, I saw intentional implementation from the beginning to the end of the school year that led up into the student-led conferences, which highlighted all of the components of the classroom. We saw group dynamics support the culture, a community of language around not only the class norms, but the mission statement and goal setting process. We saw a promotion of goal setting both individually and group. We saw feedback and communication that started with the teacher, but then ultimately led its way to the students. And then we saw students become problem solvers and future forward planners. In the goal setting theme, we saw how centralized it was in the model itself, both the group and individual goal setting. We saw the promotion of positive planning and the celebration of the outcomes of that planning. We saw data-informed decisions, and we saw the development of the goal-setting process with things like the quality tools and the PDSA cycle. With student ownership, we saw throughout the whole model just the students be released the ownership from the teacher and to take over that ownership themselves throughout all of the components. We also saw the desire to achieve, raise, through the use of things like growth mindset, and students were given feedback and the ability to use voice in the classroom, and then ultimately the celebrations that took place because of those things. This slide shows some examples of the classroom culture. On the left, you can see the mission statement and class norms that one of the classrooms created. And then on the upper right, that is the dojo menu where kids can earn points that was directly tied to the class norms. And then on the bottom was part of the survey given to teachers on a scale of least effective to most effective. How do you think student-led classroom model impacted your classroom? And all three of the teachers thought it was either very effective or highly effective. This slide kind of shows some of the goal-setting component questions that were asked in the teacher survey. Again, they were from least effective to highly effective, being 5, being highly effective. And as you can see, each of the 3 questions: how effective do you think the student-led classroom is helping you achieve goals? How effective was the student data binder in the process of collecting data? And how effective is the use of quality tools in supporting data binders and data walls? All 3 of the teachers rated those as effective or highly effective. Here we see examples of goal setting that took place in the student data binders. These are the actual pages from the data binders that student uses for both reading and math, as well as the reflection page that they used at the end of the month to reflect and assess on their goals. The survey showed that teachers agree that they see more student ownership using this model. To your right, you can see a tracker that's used in the data binder. This is a tracker used to look at a student's Lexia usage over the course of several weeks so that they can track and see if they met their goals. Also, then you can see the 3 responses that came through the survey where teachers are saying yes, absolutely. And one teacher says that they believe that students have more ownership in this model because they are taking control of their goals that they set for themselves and adjust when necessary. They can see when something isn't working and make adjustments to take a step towards a modified goal as they see necessary. So we definitely saw ownership, and I was able to observe that during my observations, but then also was reinforced by what the teachers were seeing within their own classrooms. Here on the left, you can see a student data wall or data center within one of the classrooms. This teacher also gave a testimony in their survey about their classroom. As follows, it says, some of the strengths of this type of classroom is that students are to take ownership of their academic growth and social emotional growth with peers. I think it is extremely powerful to give essential data to students so that they are aware on what they need to do in order to accomplish a task or goal in order to make growth. I have seen tremendous amounts of growth with a student-led classroom, not only academically but also socially as a collective group. The group in particular had the most growth of all of my years of teaching with a student-led classroom, with their social emotional growth with each other and others around the building. The biggest impact to their social growth was our classroom meetings. Once they started coming up with their own suggestions to problems, behavior turned almost immediately. So this is just a great highlight and representation of the not only the growth but the ownership piece within the student classroom, and how giving ownership to the students can really empower them to take control of their learning and even combat or turn around any problems that they are having within their own classrooms. In Chapter 5, we cover the conclusion with the topics implications, recommendation for practice, recommendation for future studies, and look over our key sources. 3 themes really emerged out of the student-led classroom, but one seemed to really emanate throughout, and that was the theme of student ownership. Teachers really start off the year by gradually releasing ownership. First, they showcase the components, and then they start to give them over to the students. The student data binder stands out among these components as the main tool I feel that they really connect with to do their individualized goal setting, where they can really see the impact on their own results. The utilization of growth mindset throughout helps the students to stay positive and tackle challenges that come along their way, as well as to support others through their challenges and the class as a whole to build morale around each other so that they can meet their group goals during classroom meetings utilizing the data wall. Lackey's theory was really at the heart of the student-led classroom. So many times did it go back to goal setting, and having higher self-efficacy really allowed students to take ownership of their goals and really use summary feedback and then create their own summary feedback to move that goal further during the conferences and debriefs. Goal setting and achievement were highlighted throughout the entirety of the model and just gave students the sense to want to do better despite the outcomes. So it was always focusing on how he could take the data and just improve forward, which gave them a really good, healthy mindset to do that. My recommendations for future practice really lays in the hands of the teacher. I think it's so vital that the teacher really understands the model because their impact and role in the model is so crucial. If the foundation isn't laid straight, then the model isn't going to be as effective for the learners. So the teachers need to fully understand all of the components within the model so that they can deliver them to the students so that they can take ownership of them. They also need to have plans for implementation, so they need to think about how they're going to roll this out in their classroom and what's going to work for their style of teaching. And they need to be able to adjust for their groups. Not every group of students is the same type of learning community, so you might have to tweak what you're doing a little bit from year to year to make it fit the group that you're working for so that they can then take ownership of it in a way that works for them. I think training across the board, so if you're going to implement this in a school with multiple classrooms, ensuring that all teachers are trained on the components so that it can be as equitable as possible across classrooms. And then you have to just have the mindset. It can be difficult sometimes for teachers to give up ownership of the classroom to kids, especially when they're new to the classroom and they're kind of leery about it. So just making sure that teachers have the mindset that they're able to establish a solid foundation and then give ownership to the children and gradually release as the year progresses. Recommendations for future studies I have is that I would really like to see a correlation study done that's conducted to assess how student ownership in student-led classroom contributes to the success of the academic achievement and how those two play a factor with one another. I would also like to take a deeper look into students who are highly motivated versus those who are less motivated, both initially at the beginning and then throughout the model. So this was something that surfaced through my observations, but also in the teacher survey, that there are definitely students who are like resistant to the model or lacking at the beginning. Some of them eventually come around, but some of them are a little bit less motivated throughout. So I'd like to see what really factors are in play there and how those factors can be addressed so that students could take away that lack of motivations and start to invest in the classroom. So I also think that would be an interesting perspective to research as well. There were definitely some limitations and potential biases that needed to be addressed in the research process. One potential bias was that I used my own classroom, so I had to be very careful that I was looking at the data and being descriptive of fact and what I was actually seeing. One of the limitations was that it was a descriptive study, so there wasn't actually like demonstration of how the student-led classroom impacts academic achievement, but it was actually more of a descriptive model showing how these things could happen. And then finally, the coronavirus really shortened the time that I wanted to spend researching in the classroom. So a couple of things that I wanted to include were cut short by that. One of them being that I wanted to watch each of the teachers have a meeting individually with one of the students implementing their data binder and talking over some of the data. But some of those things did get cut short, and therefore presented themselves as a limitation. And finally, here are the key sources that were used to create the research conducted on the student-led classroom.